Would you hold on to hope when everyone around you said it was hopeless? When the world, your neighbors, your own voice in the dark, whispered, "You won't make it back"? Sam Ferris stood on the stoop of his old Brooklyn apartment, his army uniform stiff and faded, a battered duffel at his feet. The city hummed beneath him, trolley cars rattling along Fulton Street and the distant clang of a ship's bell on the East River. The war was over, but the words from that long-ago night still echoed in his mind. He remembered Nora's eyes, steady, luminous beneath the dim rooftop moonlight, and the promise they'd made as the city slumbered around them. "Come back," she'd whispered, her voice trembling just enough for him to notice, "and I'll be waiting." To anyone passing by, Sam was just another soldier returned from Europe, a little thinner, a little older, with secrets carried home in the creases of his uniform. But to Sam the stoop was more than weathered stone. It was a memory, a threshold, the place he'd left as a boy and returned to as someone else. He could still taste the city, the way Brooklyn woke up in the morning to the scent of fresh rye bread from the bakery below, how laundry flapped on the lines strung between tenements, and the symphony of life that never paused, not even when the world was at war. Sam's childhood played out on these streets, stickball in the alley, the crack of laughter echoing off brick walls, Nora's laughter always a little louder, a little closer. They'd been neighbors for as long as he could remember, their families living floor to floor in a narrow red brick building that leaned slightly to the left, as if tired from years of holding so many lives. The Ferrises, Polish Jewish immigrants, brought with them the rituals of the old country, the smells of simmering stew, the soft cadence of Yiddish heard through the pipes at night. The Delvecchios lived just across the hall, their windows always open, the aroma of garlic and basil drifting out to mingle with the city air. Sam and Nora met before either could properly tie their shoes, two city kids sharing a world that sometimes felt too big, sometimes too small. On summer evenings they'd climb the rickety fire escape, scrambling up to the rooftop with scraps of bread and a dog-eared book. The city stretched out before them, a patchwork of lights and shadows. They'd read aloud, trading turns, Sam with his careful, measured tone, Nora with bursts of energy, her hands painting pictures in the air. When the world changed, when war crept into every conversation, every headline, life in Brooklyn adjusted, but it never stopped. People lined up with ration books in hand, trading stamps for eggs or sugar. Blackout curtains turned windows into blank eyes after dusk, and sometimes the only light came from the glowing ends of cigarettes on the stoop. Nora snapped photographs whenever she could, her camera a constant companion. She captured the faces of their neighbors, the resilience in the lines of a mother's smile, the silent fatigue in a father's eyes. She worked at the munitions factory by day, hands stained with oil and ink, her dreams of becoming a photojournalist pressed between shifts and night classes at the community center. Sam watched her change, watched her grow into herself. She grew sharper, wittier, her laughter now tinged with a kind of urgency, a need to matter, to witness, to remember. Their friendship was the sort that didn't require explanation. They knew each other's silences, as well as each other's words. On the rooftop, Sam shared his love of jazz, slipping a battered record from his father's collection onto a portable player. They'd listen to the crackling notes of Billie Holiday, the music drifting over the city as if Brooklyn itself was listening too. But war hovered over everything. Sam's older brother, Isaac, had already been drafted, his letters home filled with careful optimism and stories Sam suspected were sanitized for their mother's sake. Sam's father, a tailor, pressed every uniform that came into his shop with a heavy heart. At the corner diner, the talk turned grim. "Boys like you don't come back from there," the older men muttered, voices thick with the smoke of their doubts. Sam kept his head down, but the words clung to him. It was in the small hours of one autumn night, leaves skittering along the curb, that the letter came. The envelope was thin, the type crisp. "Samuel Ferris, you are hereby ordered." The words blurred at the edges, but the meaning was clear. He found Nora on the rooftop, her camera in her lap, knees drawn to her chest. The city was quieter than usual, the blackout stretching its long fingers over Brooklyn. They sat in silence first, sharing the chill, the uncertainty. "So, it's happening?" she asked, her eyes never leaving the skyline. He nodded, unable to trust his voice. A breeze caught the edge of Nora's hair, pulling it across her cheek. She tucked it behind her ear, glancing at him, her expression unreadable. "You know, I always figured you'd get out of here first. I thought maybe you'd run off to Paris, write poetry or something." She tried to smile, but it faltered. Sam looked at the city, the distant lights. "I never wanted to leave like this." Nora's fingers tightened around her camera. "Promise me something, Sam?" He turned to her, the weight of her gaze more daunting than any battlefield. "Anything. Come back." "That's all," she said, voice steady, though her eyes glistened. "Come back and I'll be waiting." He wanted to say more, wanted to tell her all the things he'd never found words for, how every letter she wrote was a lifeline, how her laughter made the world brighter, how he'd fallen for her one ordinary evening when she'd handed him a book with a note inside that simply read, "Don't forget who you are." But the words tangled in his throat, and the city carried them away. In the days that followed, everything moved too quickly. The neighborhood swelled with pride and worry as Sam prepared to leave. His mother wept quietly, hiding her tears behind the clatter of pots in their small kitchen. His father pressed Sam's uniform with hands that trembled only when he thought no one was looking. Nora, for her part, kept busy. She worked longer hours at the factory, fixing her focus on the machines, the endless rhythm of production. At night, she developed her photos in the cramped bathroom, red light spilling under the door. Each print was another fragment of a world she wanted to remember, a world that might not be there when Sam returned. The day before his departure, Sam found her waiting on the stoop, a brown paper bag at her feet and a camera slung over her shoulder. She handed him a sandwich, still warm, pressed into his hands with a shy smile. "I figured you'd need something better than army chow," she said, nudging his shoulder. "Don't say I never did anything for you." He laughed, the sound surprising them both. "You're the best, Nora." She looked away, biting her lip. "Don't let them change you, Sam. Promise me you'll write and—" She hesitated, then slipped a small envelope into his jacket pocket. "Open it when you really need it." He wanted to hold her, to say all the things he'd never dared, but the world was watching. So he nodded, tucking her promise close to his heart. The morning Sam left, the city was wet with rain, puddles shining like spilled mercury between the trolley tracks. Penn Station was a blur of uniforms and tear-streaked faces, the air thick with the scent of coal and goodbye. Nora stood on the platform, her gloved hands trembling as she pressed a photograph into Sam's palm. It was a picture she'd taken on the rooftop, the two of them backs to the city, shoulders touching, the sky a wild swirl of clouds above them. "Don't forget where home is," she whispered. He squeezed her hand, the station dissolving around them. Somewhere a whistle blew, urgent and final. On the train, Sam unfolded the photo, tracing the outline of Nora's smile. He pressed it into his wallet, alongside her letter, and watched as the city slipped away behind him, brick by brick, shadow by shadow. The world moved on. In Brooklyn, the days blurred together, ration lines growing longer, the war news growing grimmer. Nora lost herself in work, the clang of machinery drowning out the ache in her chest. She wrote to Sam every week, her words careful and bright, hiding her worry behind stories of the neighborhood, of the baker's new dog, of the old man on the corner who still played the accordion at dusk. Sam's letters came less often, but when they did, they were filled with fragments of hope. Descriptions of the French countryside, the camaraderie of soldiers, the ache of longing. In each letter he mentioned the photograph, how it kept him grounded, how it reminded him of the promise he'd made. In the quiet hours, Nora would sit on the fire escape, the city's heartbeat thrumming beneath her, and wonder if hope was enough. If promises made in the dark could survive the distance, the fear, if boys like Sam really could come back. But she held on to his words, and he held on to hers. And somewhere in the space between Brooklyn and the battlefields, between the clang of trolley cars and the thunder of distant artillery, a promise endured. Would you hold on to hope when everyone said you wouldn't make it back? Sam Ferris did. For Nora, for Brooklyn, for the life waiting just beyond the war's shadow. And as the city woke to another day, trolley cars clattering, bread rising in neighborhood ovens, laughter on stoops, hope, fragile as it was, pressed quietly on. And somewhere, a girl next door waited, camera in hand, heart in her throat, believing in a promise that refused to fade. The first weeks at the front carved themselves into Sam Ferris with a slow, relentless edge. France in November was a world away from Brooklyn, its fields sodden and gouged, the air heavy with fog and the strange, acrid perfume of cordite and churned earth. Sam's uniform, once pressed and hopeful, was now dark with mud and sweat, the collar rough against his neck. Every night when the shelling slowed enough for sleep, he would reach into his breast pocket and feel for Nora's photograph, soft, worn, the corners curling from so many hands. Her letter the day before had been brief, censored, with black bars where she'd mentioned the name of the factory and what she'd heard on the radio. But her handwriting, looping and stubborn, pressed straight through the paper. "Don't let them turn you into someone you're not, Sam," she'd written. "I'll be waiting, I'll always be waiting." Out here, that promise felt both precious and impossibly far away. The company bivouacked in the ruins of a French barn, its rafters splintered by mortar fire. Rain drummed on the tin roof, a staccato that never quite let him forget where he was. At night, he listened to the men talk, about girls back home, the Yankees, the taste of fresh bread. Sometimes, under his breath, he hummed the jazz standards he and Nora had played on the record player back on the apartment rooftop. The music was a lifeline, threaded through days of thunder and fear. One evening, huddled over a battered radio set, Sam tried to tune in to London. The static was thick, the signal faint. He felt the weight of his heritage in every syllable. Ferris, born first, a Polish-Jewish name his father had changed in the hope America would be kinder. Still, there were sideways glances from the other boys in the unit, jokes about kraut blood and Jew luck. Sam learned to laugh, to keep his eyes on the dials and his voice low, but the words lodged under his skin. It was Private O'Malley who first asked one night after a barrage, "Your folks, they ever worry you'd end up fighting on the wrong side?" The question came with a nervous grin, but Sam heard the fear behind it. He shrugged, answering with a practiced calm, "We're all on the same side now, aren't we?" But when he lay down, shivering in his blanket, he replayed the exchange, wondering if any side could truly feel like home. Back in Brooklyn, Nora Delvecchio's days blurred together in a haze of factory whistles and ration lines. She worked the swing shift at the old Navy Yard, hands rough and stained from hours shaping shells and torpedo casings. The factory was a world of women, Italian, Irish, Polish, all elbow to elbow in blue overalls, hair tucked under scarves, eyes bright with exhaustion and pride. Lunch breaks were spent hunched over weak coffee and stale bread, trading stories and cigarettes. Nora captured it all with her battered Kodak, slipping rolls of film into her pocket at the end of each shift. She loved the way the lights spilled through high windows in the afternoon, gilding the rows of determined faces. Each photograph was a testament. We are here, we are doing something that matters. At home, her mother saved every scrap of newsprint and ration coupon. Her father, stoic and tired, said little but watched her with worried eyes. "You can't wait forever, Nora," he would say after dinner, his voice as gentle as the hand he placed on her shoulder. "You're young. You should be living." But Nora's heart was somewhere far away, slogging through mud and silence. She read Sam's letters by lamplight, their edges soft from rereading. He wrote about rain, about cold, about the way the stars looked through the trees, about missing home, about missing her. The world outside kept spinning. On Saturdays, she developed her photos in the darkroom at the community center, the scent of chemical baths sharp and comforting. Mrs. Klein, the supervisor, would peer over her shoulder and nod. "You've got an eye for hope, kid," she'd say, tapping a finger on the print of 3 girls laughing, arms linked, grease on their cheeks. One evening, as Nora left the center, a sailor named Tom, who'd grown up down the block, caught up with her. "You ever get tired of waiting for that boy of yours?" he asked, grinning, his cap cocked just so. "A lot of soldiers don't come back, you know." Nora smiled, but her answer was a steel thread. "He'll come back. I believe in him." She turned away, the echo of his words trailing her down the street. In France, Sam's unit moved from village to village, the world reduced to grey mud and sudden violence. He found comfort in small rituals, shaving with cold water, writing Nora's name in the margins of his notebook, trading chocolate rations for a few moments of quiet. Each night, he unfolded her photograph and let himself remember her laugh, the way she leaned over the roof's edge to watch the city lights blink on one by one. He tried to write whenever he could, though the censors stripped his letters down to fragments. "I'm fine," he wrote. "I dream of home." He sent a sketch of the woods, the moon caught in bare branches, hoping she would recognize the longing behind it. After the fighting near Bastogne, Sam's company was hit hard. The shelling was sudden, the world erupting in noise and fire. He dove into a crater, clutching the radio to his chest, feeling the earth shake beneath him. When it was over, he lay stunned, pain blooming in his leg, the taste of blood in his mouth. He woke in a field hospital, the ceiling canvas overhead, the scent of disinfectant and fear thick around him. A nurse with tired eyes pressed morphine into his arm and told him he'd been lucky. "You'll keep the leg," she said, her voice brisk, "but you'll have to rest." Sam stared at the ceiling, wondering what he would tell Nora, wondering if he would ever run up the apartment steps 2 at a time, the way he used to. Days blurred into each other. Sam counted them by the letters that failed to arrive. The mail was slow, the censors careful, and each empty morning felt like a test. He worried that Nora had moved on, that the war had changed him beyond recognition. Sometimes, in the darkest hours, he almost wanted her to, so she could be safe, so she could be happy. But then, a month after the ambush, a letter appeared. The handwriting was hers, shaky but defiant. "I hear the trains at night and think of you," she wrote. "I wait for the postman every morning. I'm still here, Sam. I'm not going anywhere." He read it again and again, clutching it in his good hand, letting her words anchor him. Back in Brooklyn, Nora faced her own battles. The rumors of casualties made their way through the factory like wildfire. Girls whispered in the locker room, clutching telegrams with trembling hands. Every day, Nora scanned the lists in the newspaper, heart pounding at every familiar name. Her father grew more insistent. "Nora, sweetheart, you need to think of your future. What if he doesn't come back?" Her mother pressed her hand and said nothing, the silence heavier than any words. But Nora found solace in her photography. She captured the boys on leave, arms around their girls, the mothers in the breadline holding tight to hope. She organized a small exhibition at the local church, the walls lined with stories of survival and resilience. The community came, drawn by the faces they knew, faces tired but determined. One afternoon, she received a letter from Sam's sister, Miriam. "He's been wounded, but he's alive," it read. "He's stubborn as ever. Write to him, Nora. He needs you." Nora's breath left her in a rush. That night, she wrote until her fingers cramped, pouring everything she couldn't say aloud into the page. She told him about the exhibition, about the sailor who asked her to dance, about the way the city felt both empty and full of him. The next morning, she slipped her latest photograph into the envelope, a shot of the rooftop at sunset, the city spread out below, golden and endless. "So you don't forget what's waiting," she wrote in the margin. For Sam, recovery was a lesson in patience and humility. He learned to walk again, slowly, gritting his teeth against the pain. The hospital was full of men like him, broken and mending, trying to remember who they'd been before. He made friends with a boy from Tennessee who showed him how to play poker with a deck missing 2 jacks. He listened to the news from home, the static-laced broadcasts that spoke of hope and victory. But the letters from Nora were what kept him going. He read them aloud, quietly, in the early mornings. He pictured her in the factory, hair tied back, camera slung around her neck. He imagined her laughter, her stubbornness, the way she met the world head-on. Still, doubt crept in. Letters were lost or delayed for weeks. He sent replies that never seemed to reach her. Each silence was a wound, each unanswered day another shadow. He wondered if the world could ever be the same, if they could ever find their way back to the easy friendship and laughter of before. In Brooklyn, the war dragged on. Nora's days grew longer, her nights more restless. She watched her friends pair off, marry, move away. She listened to her mother cry quietly in the kitchen, mourning for sons lost and futures uncertain. The city felt changed, raw at the edges. But Nora clung to her hope. She wrote to Sam every week, even when the news was scarce. She took photographs of the empty streets at dawn, the first snow on the stoop, the way the city seemed to hold its breath. Each picture was a promise. "I'm still here. I haven't forgotten." One evening, the sailor, Tom, found her on the subway platform. "You shouldn't waste your life waiting for something that might never come back," he said, voice gentle. "There's a whole world out there for you, Nora." She met his gaze, steady. "I know, but he's my world, at least for now." Through pain and distance, Sam clung to the memory of Nora's voice, her unyielding faith. He watched men around him falter, letters returned unopened, photographs tucked away. He saw the toll the war took on all of them, the way hope became a currency more precious than cigarettes or sugar. There were days when despair pressed close, when he almost let himself believe the voices that said he wouldn't make it back. But then another letter would arrive. A joke about their neighbor's laundry, a scrap of poetry, a photograph of Nora, smiling through the city's grey winter. And hope would flare again, stubborn and bright. The war ground on, each day a test of endurance, of faith. In Brooklyn, Nora waited, heart aching, fingers stained with developer and ink. In France, Sam fought to heal, to believe. Their love, quiet, unspoken but fierce, was a thread stretched taut across an ocean. Neither could know what the future held. But through every silence, every shadow, they held on. Would you have the courage to hold on to hope, even when the world told you to let go? If you want to hear what happens next, how Sam and Nora's story unfolds, make sure to subscribe and join us for the next chapter. Their journey is far from over, and together we'll walk every step. The wind off the river was sharp as a knife, slicing through the haze that hung above Brooklyn's rooftops. Sam could taste the city, coal dust, bread from the bakery below, the faint tang of rain on pavement even when the sky was clear. He stood on the stoop, duffel in hand, but for a moment he was somewhere else entirely. France. The Ardennes. Mud sucking at his boots, shells bursting like thunderclaps far too close. Nora's photograph pressed tight against his chest, the ink on her letters bleeding from the sweat and rain. For months, that paper had been the only thing that felt real. He blinked, the world shifting back. The war was over. He was home. And still, the question gnawed at him. Was Nora? Had his promise, battered by distance and doubt, meant enough to carry through all that the world hurled at them? Asterisk. 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 Months earlier, the world was all grey and olive drab, and the endless, numbing cold of the Belgian winter. The Ardennes looked nothing like the world Sam and Nora once knew, the sky pressed close, heavy with unshed snow. His hands were raw beneath the gloves. The radio set a dead weight on his back as he huddled in the foxhole, listening for static and hope. Nights blurred together, flares arching over the trees, the staccato of distant rifles, men whispering beneath the blanket of dark. He wrote to Nora by candle stub, the pencil trembling in his grip, each word a small act of defiance against the silence that followed the shelling. Asterisk, dear Nora. Asterisk. Sometimes I think about the way the city sounds at night, how the trolley cars rattle, how Mrs. Levine bickers with her husband through the walls. It's funny, the things you miss. Here, it's just the wind and the crackle of the radio, waiting for the code that means we move again. I keep your photograph tucked in my helmet. I hope you're still taking pictures. I hope you're still you. That's what gets me through. But letters came late or not at all. The censors cut pieces out, black lines marching across paragraphs. Sam would fold them carefully, hold them to his lips when the darkness pressed in too close. One morning, dawn barely a suggestion on the horizon, Sergeant O'Malley nudged him awake. "Ferris, radio up. Command wants a position check." Sam's stomach clenched. The last patrol had ended badly. A new recruit, barely 18, hadn't come back. Sam wiped the grit from his eyes, tuned the set, and sent the message. A crackle, a burst of static. Then enemy fire ripped through the stillness. The world exploded. Sam dove for cover, the radio shattering beside him. In the chaos he felt the hot bite of shrapnel along his arm, then nothing at all. He woke in a field hospital, the world reduced to a haze of pain and morphine. Men groaned on either side of him, faces pale and eyes fixed on something far away. A nurse, a woman with kind eyes and a lilt in her voice, changed his bandages and pressed a letter into his hand. "It came for you," she said softly. "From home." Nora's handwriting, shaky but unmistakable, Sam. I heard about the push. Mama says I should pray more, so I do. But mostly I just work and wait and hope. They say you won't come back, but I know you. I know you're stubborn enough to prove them wrong. He pressed the letter to his lips, eyes burning. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. Brooklyn was a city of waiting. Nora learned this in the slow hours between shifts at the munitions factory, when the assembly line's rhythm was the only thing that made sense. Outside, the world narrowed to ration lines and blackout curtains, newsreels and telegrams. She wore her hair tied back in a kerchief, hands stained with grease and powder. Each day, as whistles blared and women shouted over the clang of machinery, Nora found herself watching the other girls. Some wore engagement rings on chains around their necks. Some had started to accept the attention of the sailors and dock workers who lingered near the gates. She had no ring, only hope, and a camera slung over her shoulder. After her shift, Nora wandered the streets, capturing the city's stubborn beauty. A boy sharing a loaf of bread with his sister on a stoop, an old man playing chess with himself in the park, the stoic line outside the butcher's shop. Each photograph was a prayer, a reminder that life endured. One evening, as dusk painted the city in lavender and gold, Nora's mother called her into the kitchen. The air was thick with the scent of tomato sauce and worry. "Nora, you can't wait forever," her mother said, wringing her hands on her apron. "He's a good boy, but so many don't come back. And if he does, war changes people." She hesitated, eyes pleading. "Frankie Russo asked about you again." Nora bristled. "I'm not interested in Frankie, I made a promise." She looked down at her hands, the pale sliver of Sam's photograph peeking from her pocket. Her father, silent at the table, finally spoke. "Hope is a hard thing, Nora. It can make you brave, or it can break your heart." She left the kitchen, the words circling like crows. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. Back in France, Sam's body healed, but the wound inside festered. He watched as new replacements arrived, faces pinched with fear, and others vanished, names replaced by numbers. There were moments when he wanted to give up, to let the churn of war swallow him whole. But each night he pulled out Nora's photograph, tracing the outline of her smile. He remembered the rooftop in Brooklyn, the promise that had seemed so simple. "Come back and I'll be waiting." He clung to it, even as hope thinned, stretched to breaking. Then, one bitter morning, the lieutenant called for volunteers. A radio outpost had gone silent near the Siegfried line. They needed someone to re-establish contact. Sam hesitated. The last mission had nearly ended him. But something inside him, pride, stubbornness, maybe love, pulled him to his feet. "I'll go," he said, voice steadier than he felt. The patrol slogged through mud and ruin, the air heavy with the stench of cordite. They found the outpost abandoned, the radio smashed. Sam knelt in the debris, piecing together wires and hope. A burst of static, then a faint voice. He relayed the coordinates, fingers numb and bloodied. The mission saved a platoon caught in an ambush. For a moment, Sam felt the weight of the world lift just a little. That night, he wrote to Nora. Asterisk, "I don't know if these words will reach you, but I need you to know. You're the reason I keep going. The world says I won't make it back. Maybe they're right. But I have to try. For you. For us. Asterisk. Asterisk, asterisk." Spring came late to Brooklyn that year. Victory was a rumor, passed from stoop to stoop, but the city dared to hope. Nora watched as flags appeared in windows, gold stars beside blue, and wondered what her own would mean. She hadn't heard from Sam in weeks. The silence clawed at her, filling her dreams with shadows. At work, she moved like a ghost, her camera gathering dust. One afternoon, Frankie Russo cornered her outside the factory, a bouquet of violets in his hand. "Come on, Nora," he said, forcing a smile. "You've waited long enough. You deserve someone who's here." She shook her head, voice steady. "I made a promise." Frankie's jaw tightened. "You're a fool if you think he's coming back. They don't. Not boys like him." Nora's hands curled into fists. "You don't know him." She left him standing in the street, the violets wilting in his grasp. That night she climbed to the rooftop, the city spread out beneath her. She took out her camera, but her hands shook too much to focus. Instead, she closed her eyes, feeling the wind on her face, the pulse of the city. She whispered into the dark, "Please, come back. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk." The end came suddenly. Rumors of surrender, parades in Paris, champagne in the streets. But for Sam it was a slow dawning, a day when the guns fell silent and the world held its breath. He was thinner now, older, the map of the war etched into his skin. He packed his duffel, the photograph of Nora the last thing he tucked away. The journey home was a blur, trains and troop ships, strange cities and stranger faces. At every stop, he scanned the crowds, half expecting to see her. Brooklyn emerged from the fog, unchanged and yet utterly new. The stoop was the same, the bakery, the trolley cars, the clang of the ship's bell. But Nora wasn't there. He waited, heart pounding as the city moved around him. Mrs. Levine from upstairs stared, then smiled, disappeared inside. Sam sat on the steps, the duffel between his knees, and pulled out Nora's photograph. He traced the edges, the corners soft from years of longing. The door creaked open behind him. He turned, breath caught in his throat. Nora stood in the doorway, her hair shorter now, eyes rimmed with worry and hope. She wore the blue dress he remembered, a camera slung around her neck. For a moment, neither spoke. The city noise faded, the world narrowing to the space between them. She stepped out, voice trembling. "They said you wouldn't come back." Sam tried to smile, his own voice raw. "I kept my promise." She touched his face, fingers tracing the scars, the proof of every mile between them. "I waited," she whispered, "even when everyone told me not to." He took her hand, pressed it to his heart. "You're the reason I made it." Tears slipped down her cheeks, mingling with laughter. The city spun on, uncaring as two lives realigned. A flash, a shutter click. Nora raised her camera, capturing the moment, the proof that hope could survive even the longest winter. He laughed, the sound rusty but real. "What will you do with that?" She grinned, fierce and bright. "I'll show the world. I'll show them you came back." He pulled her close, the promise of 1,000 yesterdays and tomorrows between them. The war had ended. The city would change. But on that stoop, in the golden hush of evening, Sam and Nora found the answer they'd carried across oceans and battlefields. Love endures, even when the world says you won't make it back. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. As dusk deepened, neighbors gathered on their stoops, drawn by the rare sound of laughter, of hope returned. Nora's mother watched from the window, hands pressed to her mouth, tears shining in her eyes. Inside, Sam and Nora sat at the kitchen table sharing bread and stories, filling the silence the war had left behind. They spoke of letters lost and found, of photographs and promises. Each word another piece of the distance closing. Later, they climbed the familiar fire escape, the city unspooling below. The sky burned with stars, for the first time in years, undimmed by war. Sam looked at Nora, her face luminous in the moonlight. "Marry me," he said, the words simple but sure. She smiled, a promise renewed. "I've been waiting my whole life to say yes." And as the city breathed around them, their story, woven through hardship and hope, became a testament to the quiet victories that outlast any war. The world had told them they wouldn't make it back, but together they proved them wrong. The morning sun crept shyly over Brooklyn's rooftops, gilding the world in gold and dust. Sam Ferris lingered on the stoop, the city's heartbeat pulsing through the soles of his worn boots. He was home, truly home, for the first time in years, and yet uncertainty sat heavy on his chest. The war had ended, but some battles lingered, the ones fought not with bullets but with hope and fear. He closed his eyes, listening to the familiar sounds. Trolley cars screeching, a neighbor's radio crackling out a scratchy tune, the distant laughter of children skipping rope. So much was the same. Yet he knew, he felt it in the marrow of his bones, that nothing could ever be quite as it was before. Sam's hand slipped into his jacket pocket, his thumb brushing against the worn edges of a photograph. Nora's face, brave, bright-eyed, smiled up from the faded paper, her hair tied back, a smudge of engine grease on her cheek. He'd carried her across continents, through mud and fire and sleepless nights. She was the beacon that lit every dark corner of Europe, the voice that called him back when despair tried to claim him. He wondered, had she changed too? Did she still wait, truly wait, or had time and longing worn away the promise they'd whispered on the rooftop so long ago? Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. For Nora Delvecchio, the city never slept. Even now, with the war officially ended, her days ran together in a blur of factory clangor and the hush of the darkroom, where she developed her photographs one by one. Each image, faces caught mid-laughter, women hunched over sewing machines, little boys playing baseball in alleys, seemed to pulse with life and longing. She'd captured the war in Brooklyn, not with headlines or uniforms, but with the quiet courage of everyday people. Still, every night, as she pressed her letters to Sam between the pages of her journal, she wondered if hope was enough. Her family urged her to let go, to look elsewhere, to find a future she could hold in her hands. But Nora's heart was stubborn. It clung to the memory of Sam's gentle voice, the way he'd listened, really listened, on the fire escape, while the city's lights flickered around them. So when she heard that a transport ship had docked and soldiers were trickling back into the neighborhood, her pulse drummed wild. She didn't admit it to anyone, but she began to walk routes that passed Sam's building, her eyes flicking up to the stoop, searching for any sign. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. Sam climbed the familiar stairwell, each step echoing with memories. Childish laughter, teenage confidences, a first trembling brush of hands. He paused at Nora's door, heart pounding so fiercely he feared it might betray him. What if she wasn't home? What if she'd moved on as everyone had urged? He took a breath, squared his shoulders and knocked. The door opened and there she stood. Nora. Her hair was shorter, her frame a little sturdier, her gaze unwavering. For a heartbeat, neither spoke. It was as if the years, the letters, the endless longing, all pressed into the hush between them. "Sam?" she whispered, her voice a trembling thread. He nodded, suddenly unable to find words. Tears stung his eyes, unbidden and unashamed. Nora reached for him, her hands tentative but sure, as if afraid he might vanish. "You made it back." He managed a shaky smile. "I promised I would." For a moment, time telescoped. The city, the war, the weight of doubt, all fell away. Sam saw only the girl he'd loved since childhood, the woman who'd waited, who'd believed when belief seemed impossible. "I kept your letters," he said, fumbling with his duffel to pull out the bundle of envelopes, their edges soft from handling. "Everyone, and this?" He held up the photograph, its corners curled from years in his breast pocket. "You kept me alive, Nora. More than you'll ever know." She reached for the photograph, her thumb brushing his where they touched. "I took it for you. So you'd remember. No matter how far you went, you always had a home to come back to." "I did," he said softly, voice thick. "I came back for you." Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. That afternoon they walked the old neighborhood, past the stoop where they'd watched thunderstorms, the corner store where Sam had bought penny candy for them both, the narrow alleys where they'd invented stories and dreams. Brooklyn had changed. New faces at old windows, war posters peeling from lampposts, the air tinged with both exhaustion and relief. But Sam and Nora found solace in the familiar, a rhythm that felt like breathing after a long-held breath. As they strolled, Sam shared stories he'd never written in his letters, about the night the radio went dead in the Ardennes, and how he'd pressed Nora's photograph to his heart, willing himself not to give in to fear, about the friend he'd lost, and the promise he'd made to live not just for himself, but for all those who couldn't come home. Nora told him of her own battles, the relentless grind of the factory, the ration lines, the ache of uncertainty. She showed him her photographs, each one a testament to resilience, to hope. For the first time, Sam saw his own city anew. Through her eyes, every ordinary moment shimmered with meaning. "You were brave here too," he said, gently tracing the edge of a photograph where Nora stood among a cluster of women, all grinning, sleeves rolled up, grease on their hands. She shrugged, but her smile was fierce. "We all did what we had to. The war was everywhere, but so was hope." Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. As the sun dipped below the skyline, they climbed once more to their old rooftop haunt. The city stretched below, alive with possibility. The air was thick with the scent of summer and distant ocean salt. Sam's hand found Nora's, warm and steady. "Do you ever wish things had been different?" she asked quietly, searching his face. He shook his head. If they were, I wouldn't be the man I am now. I had to lose a lot to realize what really matters. She leaned her head against his shoulder. And what's that? Sam smiled, a weariness lifting from his eyes. Coming back, keeping a promise, knowing that love, real love, survives even the darkest nights. They sat in silence as the city's lights blinked on, one by one. For so long Sam had feared he would return to a world that had forgotten him, to a love that had faded with time. But here, under the same sky where they'd whispered dreams as children, he realized that hope was not just something you held on to. It was something you built, piece by piece, with every letter, every photograph, every act of faith. Asterisk, 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 weeks passed. The rhythm of peace was different, gentler, but not without its own struggles. Sam found work with the city's public radio, his experience as a radio operator giving him a new sense of purpose. He spoke softly into the microphone, telling stories of ordinary heroes, factory workers, teachers, immigrants, voices that had been drowned out by the roar of war. Nora, emboldened by all she'd witnessed, began submitting her photographs to local newspapers. Her images, raw, honest, brimming with humanity, started to appear in print, capturing the resilience of a city in recovery. People stopped her in the street to thank her for telling their stories, for reminding them that they too had survived something extraordinary. Their families, once wary, came to see the depth of their bond. Nora's father, who had once urged her to forget Sam, shook his hand with tears in his eyes. "You kept your promise," he said simply. "You made it back." They married in the spring, in a small sunlit ceremony at the neighborhood church. The pews brimmed with neighbors, friends, and family, some newly returned from war, others who had never left. Nora wore a simple dress, her hair pinned back with a sprig of forget-me-nots. Sam stood tall beside her, his uniform exchanged for a borrowed suit, the photograph of Nora tucked safely in his pocket. As they exchanged vows, their hands trembled, but their voices were sure. For all the world's doubts and warnings, for all the nights spent fearing the worst, they had made it, together. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk afterward, as the city celebrated, Sam and Nora slipped away to the rooftop, their old sanctuary. The world stretched out before them, battered but unbroken. They looked out over Brooklyn, at the laundry fluttering on lines, the shouts of children in the street, the distant glow of Manhattan. Nora pressed her camera into Sam's hands. "Your turn," she said, grinning. He lifted it, fumbling with the unfamiliar weight, and snapped a photograph. Nora, standing at the edge of the world, her eyes alight with joy and promise. She laughed, the sound carrying across the rooftops, bright and unafraid. They didn't need more promises. They had each other and the city and a lifetime of stories still to tell. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. Looking back, Sam often wondered what had carried him through those endless nights, the hunger, the loneliness, the fear. It wasn't just hope, he realized, nor the promise he'd made on the rooftop so long ago. It was the certainty that no matter what the world said, love was worth fighting for. And as he and Nora built a life together, one photograph, one story, one ordinary, extraordinary day at a time, he knew they were stronger for all they had endured. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. As the years rolled on, Sam and Nora's story became a quiet legend on their block. The soldier who returned, the girl who waited, the love that outlasted war. Their home filled with laughter and music, with the scent of fresh bread and the shuffle of newspaper pages. Each anniversary they climbed the rooftop and watched the world below, grateful for the chance to begin again. Their story was not perfect. There were scars that would never quite fade, memories that would always sting. But there was also resilience and tenderness, and a faith that glowed brighter than any city light. Sam would sometimes find Nora on the fire escape, her camera in hand, watching the city with that same fierce hope. And he would remember the words she'd whispered so many years before. "Come back and I'll be waiting." He had come back, and she had waited. Against every doubt, every warning, every shadow that tried to steal their future, they had chosen love. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. As you listen to their story, maybe you're thinking about your own promises, your own impossible hopes. Maybe you've felt the world tell you it can't be done, that you shouldn't wait, that the odds are too long. But Sam and Nora's journey is proof that sometimes hope is its own kind of courage. that every letter, every photograph, every moment of faith matters. If their story moved you, if you've ever held on to hope when everyone else told you to let go, share your thoughts in the comments below. Tell us about the promise that kept you going, or the person who waited for you. And if you believe that love can survive even the darkest times, give this video a like, subscribe for more true stories of resilience and hope, and don't forget to ring the notification bell so you never miss a new journey. Because somewhere, right now, someone is holding on to hope, and your story might be the light that leads them home. Thank you for listening.